number 27 in the 50 most relevant, the players that I think we've got to have a conversation about, ranked in a subjective order for AFL Fantasy SuperCoach and Dream Team. You couldn't put this year's list together without having the reigning Norm Smith medalist. He came back from an injury in potentially one of the greatest ways imaginable, and now it's got the SuperCoach AFL Fantasy and really the entire fantasy community at large going, oh, wow. If he ends of 2024, any sentiment to how this new year is going to roll for us, this could be one of the best value buys of 2025. Joining me on this edition of the 50 Most Relevant is a man that has got no bias whatsoever. He's already been a part of the 50 Most Relevant this series, and he's a regular staple and the face of the SuperCoach SwordPlay family. It is DR, mate, talking about your reigning Norm Smith medalist. It's a good day when we get to talk about the Lions with you, isn't it?
MJ, thank you very, very much for having me on again, mate. Really enjoyed sitting down with you last time and talking some Matty Roberts, but let's be honest, we're talking about one of my boys today, one of my favourite players in the competition in Will Ashcroft. I'm absolutely pumped to deep dive in some numbers because he's a super, super relevant player, as we can see with this number on your list. So honoured to be on today, mate, and going to be a really, really interesting discussion because almost 50-50 on him. So very interested to hear your thoughts as well. Great, man.
Looking forward to it. Midfield eligible, came in after just not even a double digits game last year. If you want to count the finals, which we'll talk about, they factor in, but only a seasonal average last year of 81.9 from his 9 games in SuperCoach means he's priced under $450,000, something we did not expect to come for us heading into his third season. But injuries have a way of making life unfold in certain ways for us. An average of 84.7 in fantasy and Dream Team means he's going to set you back just under $850,000 in AFL Fantasy and just over that in Dream Team. His season high score in AFL Fantasy is also a career high score. It was against the Bombers just before the finals, a monster 136 for him, while last year a 129 was his top SuperCoach score in the home and away season. That came against the Giants back in August. But you got to go back to his debut year. He absolutely pummeled the Eagles in his debut year, a 148. So there's plenty to like about Will Ashcroft. It felt like this weird robbery for a moment in 2023 for us, DR, where we're watching a generational talent having an unbelievable fantasy breakout year. Yes, we've been blessed with the Sheezels and the Dacosses and the Reeds, but to do what he was doing in that debut year as a pure exclusive mid was rare and extraordinary territories. A season-ending ACL ruins his chance at a grand final in 2023. Big chunks of 2024 he misses. And then what he goes on to deliver without Will Ashcroft, I don't even know if the Lions make the grand final, let alone win it. He put the team on his back.
It's so true.
He was amazing. Norm Smith medal. What a player, hey?
Unbelievable, MJ. And looking back to that debut year, he really exceeded my expectations. And I still remember back to that exact moment, hearts in mouths. And unfortunately, we got the worst news possible. The great thing about this is that it happened to an ultra professional. Now, this guy's mature beyond his years. And with his recovery, he pushed so hard that he actually had to pull back a little bit because he actually got some extra swelling on the knee, which actually put him back a couple of steps. So he actually had to learn to just pull back a little bit. And he was able to actually work on things like his upper body muscle and strength, which has really helped him or going to help him as well in the future to add to that contested style of game. Although we'll talk about some of his numbers. I think he's already showing that he's got that side to his game already. But there is so much upside to this pick. We've got to keep in mind that he missed 12 months with an ACL injury. He's only played 30-odd games of football. So what could he do this year? I don't know. But at this stage, I'm not putting any sort of a cap on his ceiling. He could be anything, this bloke.
It absolutely could be true. So often in our first year, once AFL draftees come into the system, they get a really protected preseason. They're carefully curated and cared for because they want them to play through the season. And then it's really their second year on an AFL list, they get a full preseason. So arguably, now is the first time Will Ashcroft is getting a preseason. And if he's done what he's done to this point in a football sense and a fantasy landscape, try to calm the excitement train down a little bit. The upside could be huge. Look, last year coming off that ACL injury, an 84.7 in fantasy, 2 tons in the home and away season, a 111 and a 136, and the 4 scores of sub 80, an understandable slow start. While in SuperCoach, an 81.9, 2 tons. One of them was above a 120, but the 5 scores sub 80 really started slow through that home and away season. But as every game went on, you could start to see his confidence build in how he would move, just that turn, that confidence to do something that he knew from childhood to deliver. He started to rebuild that mental hurdle into confidence in his body, confidence in the work that he had done, and we started to see him turn the corner. In the finals, he went an average of 91 and a 103 in SuperCoach. So if you count finals and his 7 final games of the year, so the final month of finals and home and away, this is what he does for you in fantasy footy. A 99.9 in AFL Fantasy and Dream Team and a 107 point SuperCoach. He does that for you at this price point. Well, not only is he value, but he's happy someone you can keep at MA till season's end. DR, you alluded to it before, but for such a young player, the way he scores is not one-dimensional. And I think that's the beauty for us in the fantasy community. Looking at him in SuperCoach and fantasy as well, like, he's not just a contest guy. He's not just an outside guy. He's not just a tackle guy. He's a start. He does everything. His score build is phenomenal.
Absolutely, absolutely. And I think we were chatting about this before. His real breakout game, in my opinion, was in the final against GWS. And we've talked about his professionalism and the fact he's only 20 years old, 2 seasons, not even 2 seasons really, is it, if we count the fact he was out for so long with his ACL. But a big reason for me why this was a huge breakout game, apart from the numbers, it was 28 touches, 50-50, contested to uncontested split. As you said before, he doesn't necessarily need to be playing on the inside all the time. Fine to spend a bit of time on the outside. 9 clearances, 5 tackles, 10 score involvements. But the big thing for me is the fact that towards particularly the later part of the game, he got the midfield group in, this is at 20 years old, and said to Lachie Neale, 2-time Brownlow medalist, and Josh Dunkley, obviously elite midfielder of the game for many years, boys, let me take over. I'm feeling this at the moment. And they were happy enough. Now, this is not arrogance. This is confidence in his own ability. And it goes to show as well that 2 of the best midfielders in the competition had the confidence in this 20-year-old to go, no worries, mate, do your thing. And we know that Joey Danaher obviously kicked those last 2 goals to get us over the line. But really, if you look at that game as a whole, for me, it was Will Ashcroft. And you did touch on the fact before that without Ashcroft, we most likely wouldn't have even made the grand final. We then know what he did in his grand final game as well. But those numbers, they're only going to get better and better and better. And as we saw the season progress, they really started to improve. In 38% of his career games, he's had 26 touches or more. So the more game time that he gets, the more tog. Tog's another thing. The last 2 games in the prelim and the grand final, 2 highest tog games of the year with 82 and 84%. So the fact that he's getting on the field more, I expect those CBAs, we might talk about CBAs in a minute, what I think will happen there. I think they'll increase. There's a lot to like about these numbers, and I don't think there's any reasons to suggest that these numbers are going to go backwards, particularly if you look at that last 6 split.
Yeah, well, you look at those final 6 games and just the way he plays, whether it's required in-game to play some more defensive component, he tackles that physicality. He's really developed through that recovery. He's got that defensive element. His outside run is excellent. He's so smart at reading the game so that if it's required for him to get on the outside and to do something, he can. You need him to win the clearance. He can't. So he is this beautiful accompaniment to a midfield mix that you alluded to that feels really interesting to me because I'm still pretty confident. I'm keen on your take as a Lions supporter, how this midfield mix looks, I don't see Neil and Dunkley falling away from being that 80% centre-bounce midfield guys. I still think clearly premiership mode for the club. You've got an elite first touch clearance winner in Neil. You've got the big body bull that can play defensive and win the ball himself in Dunkley. Where do you see him sitting in this? Because, look, the centre-bounce trends for him is a bit deceptive because coming back from injury and does build as the year goes on. You see Bailey and Rayner at the start of the year, then you don't. You see Jared Lyons in, and then you don't. We see McCluggage in at times and then outside. How do you see this midfield mix arriving in 2025, let alone he's now got his younger brother there, who in many people's eyes is just as good as what Will was at the time? How do you see this Lions midfield shaping up? Because if he's going to hold, let alone increase his centre-bounce presence, that's where we can gain some hoped confidence that scoring can keep bumping for us.
Absolutely. Now, I think what you've seen with Brisbane in the last few years is what I call the big three. You touch on two of those blokes, obviously, in Neil and Dunkley, and then we've got McCluggage there. So I think they're going to be probably the major three cogs in the midfield. But if we look back to the CBAs last year, obviously Ashcroft didn't come back to round 15. So we had the big three, obviously, that I just mentioned. For the first couple of weeks, it was Jared Lyons that was that fourth cog. And then we saw from probably rounds 2 to 8, that fourth cog was a bit of a mixture between your Zach Bailey and your Cam Rayner. But then those CBAs went right down and there was a man that came majorly into the mix, and that was Jared Berry. So he came in from rounds 8 to 15, CBA percentages 47, 64, 74, 83, 68, and 76. Ashcroft then comes in round 15. Berry's CBAs for the remainder of the year, 35%, 0, 9, 4, zeros for the rest of the year. So it was really obvious when Ashcroft came back into the side that Fagan saw him as that fourth cog and that main fourth cog. His CBAs when he came in, this is Ashcroft, so he came in and the first 7, only 27%. Sorry, first 6, 27%. Then the last 7, it was 38.2%. He was just warming into the season, as we know, blowing out some cobwebs, but when he got a little bit of match fitness, his CBAs actually increased. So the fact that the data suggests as soon as he came in, the other blokes in the rotation really started to go out. For me, he's at minimum that third cog. Sorry, that fourth cog. Could he be that third cog? Well, I think he potentially could be, because Hugh McCluggage is someone that can also play on the outside. He's had 2-3 years, in my opinion, maybe biased, but at All-Australian calibre. I think if you were selecting that All-Australian side and getting a true wingman in there, we got 2 spots there. If that's the way that they selected them, surely Hugh McCluggage has at least got 1 to 2 All-Australian blazers adorning his shoulders. So for me, there is a lot of upside when it comes to the CBAs, but CBAs aren't everything, mate, because if we look at his highest CBA rate, which was 50%, he didn't actually score too well, to be honest. He only got a SuperCoach score of 74 points. His third highest came in round 21, only scored the 62 points. So that also goes to show that he's not reliant on CBAs to actually score well. That's a great thing about him. Such a great mix to this great man.
It's so true. Like, the centre-bounce correlation to a scoring midfield is something that has an element of data and truth to it. But what Will is, he isn't just a stoppage player. He scores transition for us as well. He scores through the defensive stuff as well. And so a growing centre-bounce presence, having him more around the ball, probably does make sense to seeing the scoring trend increase. But to me, I think you're right. It's not just a direct causation of high centre-bounce presence always meaning Ashcroft is going to score well, because the way Brisbane share this ball around is really interesting to me. I do want to get your thoughts on the midfield history of Brisbane in a moment, and there's some more mid-priced conversations I want to have. But the market share of Brisbane doesn't feel like any one person through this midfield is dominant. Like, there are games where, like against the Giants in round 26, just using pure AFL fantasy data for a second, Will Ashcroft has the leading market share with 7.8. But then Dunkley, Zorko are all around the 6. Neil's down at a 4.7. The 2 weeks earlier, it's Neil who's got the leading market share of points in fantasy at 8.4% of the score. Ashcroft down at 8.2. And then you've got Dunkley and Zorko down at the 6s. And then even in the grand final, Ashcroft is at 5.8. And then it's Lachie Neale, Josh Dunkley, Dane Zorko. They were all in the mid to high 6s. And then round 25 against the Blues, or the first final, if you really want to call it that way, Josh Dunkley's down at 3.6 of market share, Ashcroft's at 4.9, and McCluggage is up at 7.7. So whoever doesn't get off the chain is going to do it the following week. They protect each other, they fight as a team, and that's a strength and potentially a perceived weakness too from a fantasy perspective, which is, look, all right, Lachie, if you're not doing it today, Will's going to take care of it. If it's not you, it's Hugh, which is great for football. But the Lions' midfield history, certainly in SuperCoach of late, doesn't lend itself to massive team members in the midfield consistently with multiple players, does it?
Well, that's right. If we look back at Brisbane's midfield history for averages, for Will Ashcroft to average triple figures this year, we need to make history. So if we look back to 2019 and go all the way to 2024 to last year, only 2 Brisbane midfielders have managed to have a triple figure average. Never been 3. This from 2019 to 2024. So 2019, we had Neale and Zorko, 106 and 121 average. Then the next 2 were Clug and Berry at 94, 85. 2020, it's Neale and Clug. 2021, Zorko Clug. 2022, Neale Clug, Dunk Neale, Neale Dunkley. But there's only been 2 players in that midfield rotation that has ever scored 100 plus in the 1 year. The best third peg average that we've really had is Lachie Neale in 2021, where he got a 99. So it's pretty close, but we just have not seen this from the Brisbane midfield before. Now, can it happen? Can 3 or more players score 100 plus average? Absolutely. If we look to the Dogs, all the way back from 2020, they've had 3 to 4 players that have gone 100 plus. You know, we look all the way back to 2020, McRae, Bont, Libba, 2021, the same 3, then you add Dunkley, then the same 4 in 2022, 2023, Dunkley goes out, Treloar comes into that 100 plus mix. And then even in 2024, we had the 3 with Bont, Treloar and Libba with 104 to 126 averages. So I'm not saying that it can't happen in a team's midfield. The Dogs are a prime example. A lot of it comes down to game style, how much they share it around. But that could be a slight concern, the fact that we just haven't seen this in Brisbane's midfield mix. Can it happen? Yes, I think it can. But if we're looking for, say, a 105 to 110 average from Will Ashcroft, it could be a little bit difficult. And in saying this, I'm assuming Dunkley and Neale are both going to go 100 plus. I'd be super surprised if any of them went below triple digits. So it could be a bit of a concern. But in saying that, this bloke could be that good that they can make history in 2025.
Absolutely true. One of the great concerns for people around starting Will Ashcroft, and his ownership percentage is still very, very high. And I'll reflect that in a second, but they play the Cats in opening round. I don't think we need to get too worried about his role. I agree with you. I think he's 3rd option at centre bounce or 4th option at centre bounce with minimal deviation. The rest of the time, he's going to be around the ball. So I don't think we're looking to opening round against the Cats as what's his role? What's the midfield role? I think it's more, what does he score? And how quick is that going to accelerate his price movement is what we're going to be watching. They then play the Swans with the grand final rematch. That should be an absolute belter to watch. And then there's 2 interesting matchups either side of the round 3 bye. And if that bye didn't exist, my love for picking Will Ashcroft might hit Josh Kelly levels. Like, it is that, because before the bye, it's the West Coast Eagles. After the bye, it's the Tigers. And if you could tell me I'd get a guy that is priced in the low 80s across the formats that I think can edge, if not achieve, that 100 marker with 2 great matchups in the first month, I'd almost find it impossible to stop myself from picking Will. But because of the bye there, and it's with 4 other teams and a lot of really relevant options in our starting build with Mills, Roberts, Dacos, Perryman, Bailey Smith, Goulden, Holmes, Pullman, Neale, done like so many names, it does find it increasingly hard to prioritize him as that mid-price breakout option when so many other options in our team might feel a little bit more structurally pivotal to go towards, where we might have comparable options. That early buy does make it very challenging to prioritize him over others, doesn't it?
Absolutely, it does. And I think that's what's putting people off selecting some lines or some extra lines in their starting side, because I know personally, I'm taking a really, really big looking at an approach this year of focusing heavily on the buys. And I'm trying to avoid selecting even the mid-price, particularly premium type players that do have that early buy, because I'm thinking, well, how are they going to make up those lost points? And he's got a lot of competition at the price, Will Ashcroft. I can think of, well, who have we got? We got like Parrish, Day, Shearer, Oliver. There's just four names.
Doherty,
Just
DeGoey. Yeah,
they keep on going, don't they? And I think probably the difference between Ashcroft and some of the names that we've just mentioned is it's breakout contender versus fallen premium. And it depends which way you want to go about it. These fallen premiums actually have history on their side. We know that they've achieved most of the multiple triple figure averages before. We look at someone like Clayton Oliver, and he's been the best scorer in the game before, and probably in the SuperCoach Hall of Fame already at his age. So when you're comparing the options, it does make it a little bit more difficult to select someone like an Ashcroft, particularly over Clary, who I just mentioned, who has different issues and risks associated with him compared to Ashcroft, but he doesn't have the buy, has that history on his side. It can be a little bit tough. How many of these blokes can we actually carry through? That's the question. If a couple of these blokes somehow had DPP status, that would be a very different situation. We could potentially carry an extra one, but with competition such as the names that we've already mentioned, it does make it a little bit harder for Ashcroft to rise to the top of that list, for me anyway, mate.
Yeah, to prioritize an Ashcroft means, okay, well, now I'm adding a buy player option. I'm now down to 29 in AFL Fantasy and 30 options in SuperCoach and Dream Team to field into my squad of 30. Let alone then if you're looking at 2 or 3 or 4 of these other value names in your structure, well, now you're clipping that away. And in the buys, yes, scores are going to fall away, but do you really want all those scores to be breakout territory and or premium options? Rather, you'd be hoping some of those cash cow scores are the ones falling away. So can you start Ashcroft? Absolutely you can. DR's done a great job at mapping for us how he fits into this Lions midfield, what his scoring build is like, and he's shown through the finals and patches throughout the 2 home and away seasons prior that this guy could score 120 plus in games comfortably and against good teams, not just beating up on the lowly developing other sides. But to select him means a prioritization of allocation over other options. And with that buy, that matchup either side of it, I really want my hands on. But when you start to get almost that vertical and horizontal tiering of players with a buy and players that have value, whether it be a breakout or a fallen option, it does start to get hard to build it all. So to start with Will means you've got to have him high on your tier of players in that buy and high on your options at that price range. And when those two converge, the vertical and horizontal rankings, that probably then can give you the confidence to select him. But you're really taking those two variables, aren't you, DR, together, and then placing where you think Ashcroft is going to be to pick it.
Absolutely. A lot of competition at the price. And another thing, and look, I don't think he's going to cop a regular tag, when you got blokes like Neil in particular, but yeah, after that Norm Smith medal performance, and look, everyone knew that Will Ashcroft was a young star, but I think now he's really stamped himself as, a potential elite midfielder of the game. So does a little bit more attention come his way? Did they look at Ashcroft before as, hey, a young player with potential, but when you've got Neil and your Dunkley, we don't really prioritise Will Ashcroft. After that recent performance, do other teams start to say, well, do we need to potentially prioritise a Will Ashcroft? Because look at what he's done potentially in that final series. He's ripped other teams apart. So that could be another potential downside, is the fact that, well, now you may not get it as easy as what you had, particularly in the first year, and then those 6 games coming back before those really good 7 last year, MJ. But upside, downside, there's a lot of stuff to these picks. Another little bit of upside that I forgot to mention before in regards to numbers, mate, just while it's with me, is his goal assists. So he had 10 goal assists in his first 23 career games. By 29 games, he had 20 goal assists. He doubled that within a 6-week period. So from rounds 22 to the semi-final, 1, 2, 2, 1, 2, 2 in regards to goal assists. So it looks like that's something else that is really starting to add to his game, and that data's towards the back end of last season. And we always like to look at that data, particularly from the back end, don't we, mate? We can't even look at pre-buy averages. He just wasn't there. But that's another little bit of upside. If you can start to impact the scoreboard a little bit more, just like we saw in that GWS game with 10 score involvements, I think that's another thing that he can add to his game to just build on that average. And if we're getting 2 to 3, 4, 5 extra points a game through those goal assists and scoring assists, then that's just another little added bonus, mate. We need to look for all the little things, don't we, when we're selecting these picks. And when you're selecting a player with an early buy, you need to ask yourself the question, how are they going to make out points if you're comparing him to a Parrish, to an Oliver, whoever you're going with, or whoever you're not going to go with? These are the things that you need to look at.
Right now, at time of recording, there's 20% of the competition in Dream Team that are currently Will Ashcroft owners. 26% of the SuperCoach community are Will Ashcroft owners. 28% of the AFL Fantasy community are Will Ashcroft owners. And in that opening round game, if he knocks out a 120, oh boy, it doesn't matter about the early buys. It doesn't matter about who else I've got in that spot. People will see what we knew and saw at the back of last year, but now with an element of price movement loading. Because the question around Will, to me, is not just a when does he become a premium midfielder? Is it going to be in the next 2 minutes, 2 months, 2 years? We know it's not an if, it's a when. When is he going to become an elite? And if he starts the year strong, as much as we might go, oh, but my bias structure might not handle it. Oh, this might not work. All it takes is a Kitty Coleman not to be there in opening round and struggle to be right for the start. All it takes is Will Ashcroft to pop a big score in opening round, or one of the mid-price range fallen premiums that DR's mentioned, to just not overwhelm us with brilliance in a pre-season practice game. And all of a sudden, our structure shifts, our plans change, and we find room for Will Ashcroft. To me, he's super relevant, whether you start him or not, whether he's in your options of mid-price ranges or not. He's a guy that's got potential to clearly average 100 for us this year. He's an option that if he does that, he's one of your last options to upgrade. If not, you push him to the bench and becomes a 23rd, 24th premium if you require it. Relevancy isn't just whether you pick them, it's about the impacts of what they do around them and who you choose instead of that make a player relevant. Before we wrap up the episode, DR, we do need to look at what he lands on draft day for us. Look, if you're drafting by average, you're not going to get him. That's all I'll say, because he's an M5 in AFL Fantasy and M7 in SuperCoach. If you're letting average of the previous year dictate that, I don't see him going in the first 30 picks of a draft, though, DR, but pretty much once that third round is done and people start looking for their third or fourth mid, it's on across the formats, isn't it?
There'll be a lot of competition for Will Ashcroft around that point, I think, MJ. Look, as you know, I'm not a huge draft man myself, but I think logically thinking, third round may be a slight reach. Fifth round, I think you may get a little bit lucky. So in saying that, I've got fourth round as the ideal spot, or the most likely spot for Will Ashcroft to start getting snapped up in the draft.
Yeah, if you're confident and bullish that he's going to have a triple figure average, that is absolutely the place. Because the longer you wait on draft day for him to go, and if you're desperate to bullish, like I have to own Will Ashcroft right now in my side, the third is too early. But anything after the fifth, you are running a gauntlet of somebody wanting him, because I went through those ownership percentages. You contrast that to the Peatlings, the Cherries, the Days, the Olivers, the Dohertys, the Goeys. Like, he's going to go ahead of a lot of those guys on draft day because there is a lot of anticipation and excitement about him in the community. He's got a Norm Smith medal to prove that at least the feeling in the preseason is valid. Hey, DR, always a pleasure to talk to you. What can we expect from the SuperCoach SwordPlay gang this off-season, which I know you're a valuable piece of that team? And also, where can we get in touch with you and the team across social media?
Firstly, thank you very much for having me on again, MJ. You are one of the absolute best of the best when it comes to creating content. And on top of that, one of the best blokes you'd ever meet in the community as well. So I really appreciate you having me on again, legend. Look, probably the big project for the SwordPlay crew in the preseason, and you're a big part of this as well, mate, is our season guide. So it's currently over 250 pages available to pre-order on our website, supercoachswordplay.com. We've got all the big names, including MJ, that have contributed to this guide. I know he's doing a bit of a team preview for us, so very much looking forward to reading your part of that, mate. But apart from that, we'll be going through all the team previews. We'll have the potty going again, plenty of player profiles, more things that you can poke a stick at, mate. So very excited to get with Janet Spills and Roscoe to do that. And if you want to contact us, at the third man up is going to be the Major SwordPlay Twitter handle, and my personal one is SuperCoach_DR. Always love chatting with people, talking SuperCoach, and yeah, feel free to get onto me or send me a message anytime. But thanks very much again, legend. It's always an honour.
Mate, absolutely. If you missed any of those places that DR mentioned about the guide where you can get in touch with social media, some of the podcast stuff they've got lined up, we've placed all of it in the description of this episode for you, just to make it super easy to find it, get in touch, reach out, and engage with some of the great content that the team are creating in 2025. It's also in there. You can get in touch with us across social media, gain access to our Patreon, get your hands on some Coaches Panel merch, and pretty much everything else you need in the description of this episode. All right, we're pretty much at the halfway mark of the 50 most relevant tomorrow, number 26. Can you believe it? So, are you ready for a clue? I love that we've got the guy lined up at 26 tomorrow, because I've heard this terminology used around him where people say, I'm picking him because he's the safe building block premium. He's the guy that does present some upside, but he's just the anchor that people want to have. Yes, we should be looking for upside in our starting squads, but also, don't you want to build an element of stability? It's why so many people are looking at this player. He's gone back to back to back premium seasons. So are we about to take the trio of years into Connect 4 territory? You'll find out tomorrow in the 50 most relevant.